The steel deck is already burning. It's 10:26 in the morning on June 4th, 1942, and aviation machinist's mate first class Kiyoshi Yamada can feel the metal beneath his boots beginning to buckle from the heat. He's running, sprinting across the flight deck of the aircraft carrier Akagi, but there's nowhere to go. Behind him, a wall of orange flame climbs 60 feet into the Pacific sky. The smell hits him before the heat does. Aviation fuel, scorched rubber, and something else. Something organic. Something human. 3 minutes ago, he was preparing a Zero fighter for launch. Now half his crew is screaming somewhere in the black smoke that's swallowing the ship from stern to bow. He doesn't see the second American bomb coming. Nobody does. It punches through the flight deck like a god's fist through paper. 1,000-pound high explosive dropped from 10,000 feet by a Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber whose pilot will never know the name of the man he just killed. The explosion lifts Yamada off his feet. He's airborne for less than a second. When he hits the deck again, his left arm is gone below the elbow. He doesn't feel it yet. The shock hasn't caught up to his nervous system. What he does feel is the heat. The bomb has detonated directly into the Akagi's hangar deck, where 18 fully fueled aircraft are parked wingtip to wingtip, armed with torpedoes and bombs meant for the American carriers that were supposed to be 400 miles away. But they're not 400 miles away. They're right here, and their dive bombers have just turned the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy into a floating crematorium. Yamada tries to stand. The deck is tilting. Or maybe that's just him. He can hear men screaming in the hangar below, high-pitched, inhuman sounds that don't stop. The fire is spreading faster than anyone can move. Aviation fuel runs in rivers across the deck, igniting everything it touches. Men, equipment, hope. He crawls toward the edge. His vision is tunneling. Through the smoke, he can see the ocean, impossibly blue, impossibly calm. He can see other ships. The Kaga, 2 miles off the port bow. She's burning too. Massive columns of black smoke pour from her flight deck. And beyond her, the Soryu, also on fire. 3 aircraft carriers, the core of Japan's striking power in the Pacific, transformed into funeral pyres in the span of 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That's how long it took for American dive bombers to end Japan's dominance in the Pacific theater. That's how long it took to kill more than 2,000 Japanese sailors. That's how long it took to turn the tide of the Second World War. Yamada doesn't make it to the edge. He collapses 15 feet short, face down on steel that's now hot enough to sear skin on contact. Around him, the Akagi continues to die. Ammunition begins cooking off in the hangar below. Sharp cracks and deep booms that shake the entire ship. Men leap from the deck, into the ocean, choosing drowning over burning. Some of them are already on fire when they jump. At 10:32, 6 minutes after the first American bomb hit, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, standing on the Akagi's bridge, realizes what every naval officer dreads. His flagship is lost. Around him, staff officers are shouting damage reports that all say the same thing. Uncontrollable fires, exploding ordnance, structural failure imminent. The carrier that led the attack on Pearl Harbor 7 months ago. The carrier that was supposed to be unsinkable, unstoppable, the symbol of Japanese naval supremacy, is finished. And she's not alone. This is the Battle of Midway. Not as it appears in paintings or monuments or sanitized histories, but as it actually happened. Brutal, chaotic, and absolutely decisive. This is the story of how 307 American sailors died, and how they took Japan's chance at victory with them. This is the story of intelligence officers who broke codes, pilots who flew into hell, and commanders who gambled everything on a single desperate throw of the dice. This is the story of the 5 minutes that changed the Second World War. And it begins not with strategy, or tactics, or grand proclamations, but with fire and blood, and men burning alive on steel decks in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Because that's what war actually looks like. To understand how 3 Japanese aircraft carriers could be destroyed in 6 minutes on June 4, 1942, you have to go back 7 months. Back to December 7, 1941. Back to Pearl Harbor, when Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's carrier strike force withdrew from Hawaiian waters on that Sunday morning. They left behind 2,400 American dead, 8 battleships sunk or damaged, and a nation transformed by rage. But they made one critical mistake. They didn't find the American carriers. The USS Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga were at sea during the attack. They survived, and in the Pacific War, carriers were everything. According to the U.S. Naval War College, Japan's strategic position in early 1942 appeared overwhelming. They controlled the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies. Their carrier fleet, the Kido Butai, was the most powerful naval aviation force ever assembled. 6 fleet carriers, veteran pilots, combat experience, victory after victory. But Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, understood something his subordinates didn't. Japan hadn't won the war. They'd bought time, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Then American industrial power would crush them. Yamamoto needed a decisive battle, one catastrophic defeat that would force the United States to negotiate peace. He chose Midway, a tiny atoll 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. 2 small islands, a naval air station, strategically vital. If Japan captured Midway, they could threaten Hawaii itself, force the American carriers into a battle they couldn't avoid, destroy them, end the war. The plan was complex. Too complex, historians would argue later. Multiple invasion forces, diversionary attacks on the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, submarines deployed to intercept American reinforcements, and at the center, Nagumo's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. The same ships that struck Pearl Harbor, the same pilots, the same brutal efficiency. But the Americans had an advantage Japan didn't know about. They could read Japanese naval codes. Commander Joseph Rochefort led Station Haipo, the U.S. Navy's cryptanalysis unit in Hawaii. His team had been working around the clock since Pearl Harbor, breaking Japanese naval communications. According to declassified National Security Agency documents, by late May 1942, Rochefort's analysts had intercepted and partially decoded messages indicating a major Japanese operation against a target designated AF. They believed AF was Midway, but they needed confirmation. Rochefort devised a test. He ordered Midway to send an uncoded radio message reporting that their freshwater distillation plant had broken down. 2 days later, Japanese radio traffic mentioned that AF was short of fresh water. Confirmation. The target was Midway. And now Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, knew exactly where and when the Japanese would strike. Nimitz had 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. The Yorktown had been badly damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea 3 weeks earlier, damage that should have required 3 months of repairs. Navy engineers at Pearl Harbor fixed her in 72 hours. Welders worked through the night. Repair crews didn't sleep. The Yorktown put to sea, still trailing electrical cables, and with civilian contractors still aboard. 3 American carriers against 4 Japanese carriers. The Japanese had more aircraft, more pilots, more combat experience. On paper, the Americans were outmatched. But they had one thing the Japanese didn't. They knew the Japanese were coming. On May 28th, Enterprise and Hornet departed Pearl Harbor under the command of Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance. Yorktown followed on May 30th under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Fletcher, as senior officer, commanded the combined task force. Their orders were simple: proceed to a position northeast of Midway, wait and ambush the Japanese carrier force. The Japanese fleet departed in early June. Nagumo's 4 carriers steamed east, confident and battle-hardened. They expected to achieve complete surprise. They expected minimal resistance. According to Japanese naval doctrine, American carriers would still be in the South Pacific or near Hawaii. They would arrive at Midway too late to interfere with the invasion. They were wrong. By June 3rd, American carriers were already in position, hidden beyond the range of Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. Fletcher and Spruance knew Nagumo was coming. They knew his course, they knew his target, and they were waiting. The Japanese had superior forces. The Americans had superior intelligence. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, those two realities were about to collide. Dawn breaks over the Pacific at 4:30 a.m. on June 4th. The ocean is calm, visibility unlimited, perfect flying weather. Aboard the Akagi, Nagumo launches his first strike against Midway at 4:30 a.m., 108 aircraft, 36 Nakajima B, 5N torpedo bombers loaded with conventional bombs, 36 Aichi D-3A dive bombers, and 36 Zero fighters. Their mission? Destroy Midway's air defenses and soften the target for invasion. Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga leads the formation south. Nagumo retains half his aircraft aboard the 4 carriers, 93 planes armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. These are his anti-ship strike force. If American carriers appear, unlikely his intelligence officers assure him, these aircraft will destroy them. At 5:20 a.m., a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina patrol plane spots the Japanese carrier force. The pilot radios Midway. Many planes heading Midway, bearing 320, distance 150. Minutes later, another PBY reports. 2 carriers and battleships bearing 320, distance 180. The Americans know the Japanese are coming. On Midway itself, every available aircraft scrambles. Fighters climb to intercept the incoming strike. Bombers, obsolete Brewster Buffaloes, TBF Avengers, B-17S, even antiquated Vindicators, take off to attack the Japanese carriers. It's a desperate, uncoordinated response. Most of these pilots have never seen combat. Some of the aircraft are museum pieces. They fly anyway. At 6:20 a.m., Tomonaga's strike force hits Midway. Japanese bombs tear through fuel tanks, hangars, barracks. Anti-aircraft fire fills the sky. American fighters engage the Zeros. It's a slaughter. According to Marine Corps historical records, 15 of 25 Marine fighters are shot down in minutes. The Zeros are faster, more maneuverable, piloted by veterans with hundreds of combat hours. But Midway's defenses survive. Runways are damaged, but operational. Radio facilities intact. Tomonaga radios Nagumo at 7 a.m. There is need for a second attack. This message changes everything. Nagumo faces a decision. His reserve strike force, 93 aircraft, is armed for anti-ship operations. Torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs designed to sink carriers. But Tomonaga needs support. Midway needs to be neutralized before the invasion force arrives. At 7:15 a.m., Nagumo orders the reserve aircraft rearmed. Remove torpedoes, remove armor-piercing bombs, install high-explosive bombs for a second strike on Midway. It's a complex operation. Ordnance crews scramble across the hangar decks of all 4 carriers. Torpedoes are unloaded, wheeled to storage. Bombs are brought up from the magazines. The hangar decks become forests of high explosives. At 7:28 a.m., 13 minutes into the rearming operation, a radio message arrives on Akagi's bridge. Sight what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships, bearing 010, distance 240 miles from Midway. American ships. To the northeast, Nagumo freezes. Are there carriers in that group? Yet the scout plane didn't report any. Just surface ships. Could be cruisers, could be destroyers. But if there are carriers... At 7:45 a.m., another message. Enemy force accompanied by what appears to be a carrier. A carrier. Nagumo reverses his order. Stop rearming for Midway. Rearm for anti-ship. Put the torpedoes back on. But now the hangar decks are chaos. High explosive bombs are stacked everywhere. On deck, in the hangars, next to fuel lines. Ordnance crews are exhausted, rushing, making mistakes. Meanwhile, American aircraft from Midway are attacking. 16 Marine Corps SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrive first at 7:55 a.m. They attack through a wall of anti-aircraft fire and swarms of Zeros. Not one bomb hits. 8 aircraft are shot down. Then come Army Air Force B-17 bombers, attacking from 20,000 feet. No hits. Then Navy TBF Avengers, 6 aircraft. 5 are destroyed. No hits. The attacks are suicidal and ineffective, but they accomplish something Nagumo doesn't realize. They keep his combat air patrol busy. They disrupt his operations. They buy time. At 8:20 a.m., Nagumo's first strike force returns from Midway. 108 aircraft low on fuel, some damaged, all needing to land immediately. But the flight decks are cluttered with aircraft being rearmed. Nagumo makes another decision. Clear the decks, land the Midway strike force, then launch against the American carrier. It's the right tactical decision. It's also fatal. While Japanese crews frantically move aircraft, refuel planes, and rearm for the 3rd time in 2 hours, 3 American carrier strike forces are converging on Nagumo's position. At 9:20 a.m., Torpedo Squadron 8 from the USS Hornet finds the Japanese carriers, 15 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, obsolete aircraft, slow, fragile. They attack without fighter escort. The fighters got separated during the flight. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron leads them in. The Zeros descend like wolves. The Devastators come in low, skimming 50 feet above the water, slow and vulnerable. Maximum speed, 115 miles per hour. The Zeros hit them at 300. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron's aircraft is the first to burn. A Zero pilot puts a burst of 20mm cannon fire into the Devastator's fuel tank. The plane doesn't explode. It just starts trailing black smoke and losing altitude. Waldron keeps flying, keeps heading toward the carriers. His plane hits the water at 9:25 a.m. No survivors. One by one, the Zeros destroy Torpedo Squadron 8. Aviation Machinist's Mate 3rd Class. George H. Gay watches from his rear gunner position as every plane around him is shot down. Flames, smoke, aircraft cartwheeling into the ocean. His pilot, Ensign William W. Creamer, pushes through. They get close enough to drop their torpedo. It misses. Then the Zeros find them. Creamer dies instantly. a 20-millimeter round through the cockpit. The plane crashes into the Pacific. Gay survives. He's the only one. 15 aircraft, 30 men, 29 dead. 0 hits on Japanese carriers. At 9:40 a.m., Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise arrives. 14 aircraft. No fighter escort. The Zeros are waiting. 10 Devastators are shot down. No hits. At 10 a.m., Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown attacks. 12 aircraft. Are 2 survivors. No hits. In less than 40 minutes, 41 American torpedo bombers attacked the Japanese carriers. 35 were destroyed. Not a single torpedo hit. It looks like a catastrophe. It looks like slaughter. But the torpedo attacks accomplished something crucial. They pulled the Japanese combat air patrol down to sea level. Every Zero in the sky is now at low altitude, chasing the last fleeing Devastators. The Japanese carriers have turned and maneuvered violently to avoid torpedoes. Their formations are scattered, and everyone, pilots, gunners, officers on the bridges, is looking down at the ocean. Nobody is looking up. At 10:22 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey arrives at 14,000 feet with 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise. He's been searching for the Japanese carriers for over an hour, fuel running critically low. His squadron almost turned back. Then McCluskey spotted a Japanese destroyer racing northeast. He followed its wake. Now he's directly above Nagumo's carriers. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu are in a rough line, turning into the wind to launch aircraft. Their flight decks are crowded with planes, fueled, armed, engines running. Fighters are preparing to take off. The crews have been working non-stop for 3 hours. They're exhausted. They think the American attacks are over. McCluskey doesn't hesitate. He rolls into his dive at 10:24 a.m. Aboard the Akagi, lookouts finally spot the American dive bombers. Air raid sirens wail. Anti-aircraft guns swing skyward. But it's too late. The Americans are already diving. 70 degrees, 400 miles per hour, pulling out at 1,500 feet. At 10:26 a.m., the first bomb hits Kaga's flight deck. 1,000 pounds of high explosive detonates among 18 fully fueled aircraft. The blast ignites aviation fuel, ammunition, and the bombs that ordnance crews never finished removing. The explosion tears through the hangar deck. Men are incinerated instantly. Others are blown overboard. The fire spreads faster than anyone can react. 3 more bombs hit Kaga in the next 90 seconds. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie's dive bombers from Yorktown are hitting Soryu. 3 bombs, 3 hits. The first penetrates the flight deck and explodes in the hangar among armed aircraft. The second detonates among planes on the flight deck. The third hits the ship's aviation fuel tanks. Soryu transforms into a fireball, and McCluskey's remaining dive bombers are hitting Akagi. The flagship takes 2 direct hits. According to Japanese naval records, both bombs penetrate to the hangar deck. The explosions detonate stored torpedoes and bombs. Aviation fuel ignites. The fire spreads through ventilation systems into the ship's lower decks. Damage control teams try to fight the flames. They're overwhelmed in minutes. On Akagi's bridge, Nagumo stands frozen, watching his flagship die around him. Staff officers are shouting contradictory reports. Communications are failing. Through the smoke, he can see Kaga burning 2 miles away, and Soryu beyond her, also engulfed. It's 10:32 a.m., 6 minutes since the first bomb hit. 3 aircraft carriers, the core of Japan's Pacific striking power, are finished. The men trapped below decks don't die quickly. Damage control parties in Akagi's lower compartments are cut off when the fires seal passageways. Temperatures exceed 1,000 degrees. Some men are killed by smoke inhalation. Others burn. A few drown when seawater floods damaged compartments. Their screams echo through the ship's communication tubes until the circuits melt. On Kaga, Captain Jisaku Okada refuses to abandon ship. He orders all non-essential personnel to evacuate, then remains on the bridge. At 4:20 p.m., after 6 hours of uncontrolled fires, the ship's magazines explode. The blast tears Kaga in half. She sinks in minutes. Okada goes down with her. 814 crewmen die. Soryu's captain, Ryusaku Yanagimoto, also refuses evacuation. His executive officer finds him standing on the bridge, sword in hand, singing the Japanese national anthem as flames consume the ship. Yanagimoto orders everyone else off. He stays. Soryu sinks at 7:13 p.m. 718 men die with her. Akagi burns through the afternoon. Nagumo transfers his flag to a cruiser at 10:46 a.m. Damage control efforts continue for hours, but the fires can't be contained. At 5 a.m. on June 5th, Japanese destroyers torpedo Akagi to prevent her capture. She sinks at dawn. 267 men are lost, but one Japanese carrier survived the morning attack. Hiryu, operating separately from the other 3 carriers, wasn't hit. Her captain, Tomeo Kaku, immediately launched a counterattack. At 10:54 a.m., 18 dive bombers and 6 fighters took off to find the American carriers. They found Yorktown. At noon, Japanese dive bombers hit Yorktown with 3 bombs. One penetrates the flight deck and explodes in the ship's smokestack uptakes, snuffing out fires in 5 of 6 boilers. Yorktown slows to 6 knots. Dead in the water, listing, she looks finished. But American damage control is extraordinary. Repair crews work miracles. By 2 p.m., Yorktown is making 19 knots. She's recovering aircraft. She might survive. Then Hiryu's torpedo bombers arrive. At 2:44 p.m., 4 torpedoes slam into Yorktown's port side. The explosions tear massive holes below the waterline. Power fails. The ship lists 26 degrees. Captain Elliot Buckmaster orders abandon ship at 3 p.m. Yorktown doesn't sink. She remains afloat, listing heavily for 2 more days. On June 7th, the Japanese submarine E-168 finds her under tow and puts 2 more torpedoes into her hull. Yorktown finally sinks at dawn on June 7th. 141 men died on her. But before Yorktown went down, her scout planes found Hiryu. At 5 p.m. on June 4th, 24 American dive bombers from Enterprise attacked the last Japanese carrier. 4 bombs hit. Hiryu's flight deck erupted in flames. By evening, she was burning out of control. Captain Kaku and Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, commanding Carrier Division 2, refused evacuation. According to survivors, Yamaguchi gathered his staff officers on the bridge at 2:30 a.m. on June 5th. He gave a brief speech about duty and sacrifice. Then he and Kaku ordered everyone else off the ship. The 2 officers remained on the bridge. Japanese destroyers torpedoed Hiryu at 5:10 a.m. She sank with Kaku and Yamaguchi aboard. 389 men died. In 24 hours, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 307 aircraft, 3,557 men. According to the U.S. Naval Institute, it was the most decisive carrier battle in naval history. The Americans lost Yorktown, 1 destroyer, and 145 aircraft. 307 men died. The strategic implications were immediate and catastrophic for Japan. Admiral Yamamoto canceled the Midway invasion. The combined fleet withdrew. Japan would never again achieve strategic offensive capability in the Pacific. The 6-month window Yamamoto predicted had closed. More critically, Japan lost irreplaceable veteran pilots. The men who attacked Pearl Harbor, who conquered the Dutch East Indies, who dominated the Pacific in early 1942. They died at Midway. Japan's naval aviation training program couldn't replace them fast enough. American pilot training, by contrast, was producing thousands of aviators monthly. According to the National World War II Museum, Midway marked the turning point of the Pacific War. After June 4, 1942, Japan never won another major naval engagement. The Americans advanced. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each battle brought them closer to the Japanese home islands. The battle that was supposed to end the war in Japan's favor instead guaranteed their defeat. But understanding Midway only as strategy misses the human reality. 3,557 Japanese sailors burned to death or drowned in the space of one day. Most were below 25 years old. Most never saw the American bombs coming. They died doing their jobs, fueling aircraft, moving ordnance, fighting fires, following orders. The Americans who died were equally young. Torpedo Squadron 8, 29 men dead. Most had never been in combat before June 4th. They flew obsolete aircraft into certain death because their orders said attack. Every one of them knew they probably wouldn't survive. They attacked anyway. George Gay, the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, spent hours floating in the ocean, hiding under his seat cushion while the battle raged overhead. He watched Japanese carriers burn. He watched American dive bombers attack. He saw men die on both sides. A U.S. Navy patrol plane rescued him on June 5th. Gay never spoke much about what he saw. In interviews later in life, he described the battle mechanically: tactics, aircraft performance, navigation. When asked about his feelings about watching 29 friends die, he'd change the subject. That's common among Midway veterans. The men who survived didn't romanticize what happened. They didn't glorify it. Most described the battle in technical terms: altitude, airspeed, bomb trajectories. The emotions stayed buried, because there's nothing glorious about burning to death on a carrier deck. Nothing heroic about drowning in aviation fuel. Nothing noble about watching your friends die screaming. Midway was necessary. It was strategically brilliant. It changed the course of the Second World War. But it was also 3,862 young men who died violently in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a clear June day in 1942. The battle lasted one day. The consequences lasted 3 years. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, the Imperial Japanese Navy had ceased to exist. American carriers dominated the Pacific absolutely. The shipyards that built Enterprise and Yorktown and Hornet had produced dozens more. The pilots who died at Midway had been replaced by tens of thousands of new aviators. Japan, meanwhile, was broken. Their cities burned by American firebombers. Their fleet destroyed. Their empire collapsed. It started at Midway in 6 minutes, at 10:26 a.m. on June 4th, 1942. When Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey pushed over into his dive and changed history. When aviation machinists mate first class Kiyoshi Yamada felt the steel deck beneath his feet begin to burn. When the Pacific War's inevitable conclusion became mathematically certain. The Battle of Midway wasn't just a turning point. It was the moment Japan lost the Second World War. Everything after Guadalcanal, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Hiroshima was consequence. The fire started at Midway, and it consumed an empire.